Well, One Pulse Foundation was established following the June 12, 2016 Pulse nightclub tragedy to honor and preserve the legacy of the 49 lives, we call them our 49 angels, that were taken, and to create a sanctuary of hope. Now, if nobody's familiar with the Pulse nightclub incident, that was something that a tragedy that occurred in Orlando, Florida, where we had a group of LGBTQ, mostly individuals, just partying and having a really wonderful time in this nightclub. And then at around 2 o'clock in the morning, a gunman comes in and opens fire and shoots and kills 49 of the patrons that were there, along with injuring a host of other people that were in the proximity. So the foundation really was established following that to honor their legacy. Now, we stand on four pillars at the foundation: a memorial to that opens hearts, a museum that opens minds, education programs that open eyes, and a legacy scholarships that open doors. So those are our four pillars: to open hearts, to open minds, to open eyes, and to open doors. So before I get started here, I'd like to actually show a brief video of what it is that we stand for at Pulse. So I'm going to share my screen in a second here. Okay, so everyone should be seeing this, right?
Yes.
We can see it.
Okay, great. So this is what our four pillars. So I'd like to show this video.
Pulse wasn't just a nightclub. It was a place where people could come to feel welcome. It didn't matter who you were, who you wanted to be, you felt loved. This is what Pulse is now.
It was really important to me that people learned not only the story of what happened at Pulse that night, but also what you can do differently in your life to change the future, how we can become a better society, a better human race. That's why I began the foundation.
We are building a national memorial museum. It's part of our country's history, and it's our responsibility to see to it that this story and that the 49 are never forgotten. These museums and memorials aren't built for years. They're built for centuries. And what we're doing is more than just a memorial museum.
I hope that the memorial will bring people together from all walks of life, but I also hope that it can be a place of love.
As a family member, I said, I hope they turn this place into a museum.
The memorial is where you go to grieve, but the museum is where you go to learn.
I want people to come visit so they can take what happened here and pass it on.
I'm really excited about the educational opportunity of the museum and the wonderful things that the One Pulse Foundation is working on to build a stronger global community.
And my hope is that when they walk out, they've learned not only what happened on June 12th, but how to be a better human, that they will be able to spread the message that we will not let hate win. They will leave equipped how to do that.
So Barbara, who is the founder, she said that we want them to be equipped with how to make things better, something to that effect, right? So with that, hold on a second. Okay, so with that, Pulse established the One Pulse Academy, which is the education arm of One Pulse Foundation, committed to promoting acceptance and inclusion through innovative reflective learning methodologies. So what we're trying to do basically is utilize evidence-based research, aim to positively impact social change at the individual, group, and community levels. And the programs are designed to be exciting, interesting, smart, and engaging to ensure that the intended outcome can be achieved. But here's the thing too, right? They're intended to be exciting, interesting, smart, and engaging because that captures the spirit of the 49 lives that we lost. So everything that I pour into the program, the education programs, has to capture those factors. One of the programs that we have developed is our tribute program. So the tribute program is what I called an enhanced diversity and inclusion program. I say it's enhanced because it draws from the very best elements of existing the diversity, equity, inclusion programs, and also removes elements that are not working, right? And it applies the science of social psychology into it to guarantee that the outcomes will be made. It operates on 3 levels of human behavior: how we think about each other, how we relate with each other, and how we influence each other. It is, I know it's imagined as a diversity and inclusion program, but I look at it more, my vision for it is to build empathy. Look, when we build empathy among each other and among work groups and in relationships, then we can, the discrimination that we have towards each other can start to dissipate. So that is one of the programs that we have at One Pulse Foundation. It is the tribute program in honor of our 49 angels. And at the very granular level, it is to build empathy. All right, so that's one program. The main program that I really want to elaborate on more here is our Conversation Starter series, right? So this has been a tremendous success. It's a short film and panel discussion on social topics that tend to fall below society's collective conscious stream of thought. So here's why this is so crucial. It's because oftentimes discrimination occurs at a level in society that is not, I wouldn't say reflective of society, but that sometimes we don't realize that the people are being discriminated against because we just don't, it's just not on the conscious stream, right? So we developed this short film panel discussion to address those hidden discriminations, right? So we showed so far 3 films, right? Short films, they're about a half an hour each. And again, it's intended to bring some relevance and awareness to these problems. The first one is 90 Days, and it looks at HIV among heterosexual relationships where the woman is infected. Now, when we talk about HIV, it's usually collapsed into the narrative of same-sex, usually gay male relationships, right? Well, who would have thought that, women are impacted by this? And what emerged from this is how differently women are attacked. I should say, I think attacked is the correct word for this, right? Because of the gender inequalities that exist. It's her fault, start labeling and things like that. So that brought HIV to the surface level, right? And when it impacts women, and not just that, it was told through the eyes of an African-American couple. Well, guess what? African-American women even though HIV rates have stabilized, African-American women are the ones that are actually seeing increases in rates of HIV transmission in the United States. Well, that kind of fell below the conscious stream, the radar, right? So we have to make these things, more salient so people get notice so that we can start, finding solutions for this. The next one that we did was From Selma to Stonewall. Okay, so that explores the film explores similarities between the LGBT equality movement and the Black civil rights movement. So the thing here is that why did we connect those dots earlier, right? Or put it on a conscious stream? Because there are similarities between the LGBT equality and the Black civil rights movement. So let's not separate them. Let's try and work together towards resolution, reduce the discrimination and that both groups encounter. There are a lot of similarities, and that's what this film explored. The next film that we did was called Disarm Hate. And now that actually follows the Pulse incident, right? So 9 LGBTQs came together after the Pulse massacre on a national rally for LGBTQ equal rights and challenge America's obsession with gun violence. For some that don't know, for those that don't know, it's gun violence and anti-gun laws and things like that. That's really current in the United States discourse right now. So we did show this film, and what I'd like to do is show a clip of the panel discussion, what emerged from that, because that is truly fascinating. So I will show the clip, not the trailer or the movie, but just a 5-minute clip of the panel discussion.
I think one of the things that's lost on a lot of people is that the LGBTQ community is the only segment in society that encompasses everyone. You have Black, Latino, white, you have male, female, cisgender, transgender, you have Protestants, Catholics, atheists, you have rich people, you have poor people, you have everyone. We are all within this one microcosm of a community. So you're not just addressing the needs of one, you're addressing the needs of many from all different outlooks, aspects, and belief systems. So it can seem daunting to try to pick up one cause or a piece of a cause, because all you can do is carry your piece in that hope that someone else who feels the same way within the community will pick up their piece. And eventually you won't be staggered like this. Eventually you'll be like this. You'll be shoulder to shoulder, because it's the only way you can press through any gate. And I feel that's one of the key moments for me, was that morning when I woke up at 4:30, and they're placing porta potties. I never thought I would cry over porta potties. I did cry when I saw the price tag for porta potties. But I think, it was seeing everything actually happen. Because when I picked the date, I thought, well, of course, 7.5 weeks is plenty of time. I mean, why wouldn't someone want to make this happen, this rally? Why wouldn't someone want to be there? Why wouldn't someone want their voice heard or their face seen? 7 weeks is not nearly enough time. But it was amazing to see everything come together, and that's why I didn't give up.
So you didn't give up. Were there a lot of episodes where you just felt discouraged okay, this is just more than I can bear? Did you have a lot of episodes like that?
There were a lot of them. Yeah. People, because the big problem was, and it was quite amazing to me going into organizing the rally. I had a problem. A lot of the LGBTQ community groups, the larger name groups, your HRCs, your GLADs, did not, and I'm going to say names, did not want to stand behind gun violence reform. Didn't want to touch it. But guess what, honey? Every GVP group had no problem standing behind the pride flag, did they? No, they did not. They stood right there shoulder to shoulder with us. And I've said it before, and I will say it again. Why? Because the largest segment of the LGBTQ community affected by gun violence are trans people of color. And guess where the money comes from within our community? White gay men.
So it goes back to that.
Absolutely.
It goes back to that intersection, and even within the gay community, we're seeing a power thing here, right? White gay males with money or with power, right? Not necessarily money, but influence. So they determine the path of the community in general. And I was going to ask.
Well, they determine where those dollars go. They determine where the dollars go. Yeah.
Those go. Yeah, I was going to ask if you got support from the queer community in general, but you eloquently stated that there was some pushback from that. Why do you think that they would not support this this endeavor that you took on?
I don't think it's on their radar. I don't think it affects them on a daily basis like it does trans women of color or LGBTQ people of color. Gay, Black lesbians, gay men, Latino men, they're not affected the same as the white gay men who are truly kind of at the forefront and, with, for lack of a better term, the checkbook for the larger LGBTQ groups. So that money stays right where it is. Galas, parties, and events.
That's an interesting point.
For wealthier white or more affluential white gay people.
Well, do you think that if the incident occurred at a night where it was predominantly white gay males? Because Pulse did have nights where it was predominantly,
we would
white.
We would be having a very different conversation, and we would already have a unified front, and we would have a lot more money and a lot more spokespeople.
Okay, so that was a really, again, I said earlier that to reduce discrimination, right, you have to know that the problem actually exists. So what came out of this education program, right? This education panel discussion, I mean, film and panel discussion was this. Intersectionality leads to conflict among transgender. I didn't play that whole clip, but this emerged from it. So we had, now you think that the transgender community, right, would be cohesive, but what we found that emerged from it was the intersection of race and gender and things like that created conflict among transgenders. So that really surfaced. So we have to look at that, right? In terms of how do we heal? How do we reduce these things from happening? So we have to know that it actually exists. The LGBTQ community is the only group in society that encompasses everyone by virtue of race, gender, sexuality, faith, socioeconomic status, etc. Well, we never really give a lot of thought to that, right? But it actually is true as what emerged from this presentation. And something that to me is a little alarming. We talk about discrimination, right? But what about intergroup discrimination, right? Just as in society in general, we find within the LGBT community that the race gender hierarchy exists among LGBTQ, and it determines the politics of who gets what, when, and how. As the cast member, actually the one that the gentleman that was speaking, he actually formed a rally. He identified that it was the reason why they're not getting a lot of traction in what they're doing is because it does not support the interests of white male gay men. And if it did, then we would see more traction in that area. So that was something that falls below the radar. But look, we can address that now that we know that these things exist. So our programs at least the Conversation Starter series at Pulse is aimed at unearthing those things, right? Those underlying currents that exist that prevents us from gaining traction on anti-discrimination, anti-hate, and things like that. So in closing, I just want to say that look, our next Conversation Starter series will explore the transgender experience, right? Because that's something that's also falling below the radar. People in general see sex as a binary, dichotomous thing, where it's either male or female. But because that's how society sees sex and gender, it creates hardships for transgender. So we're going to bring some themes in this presentation, and we're going to invite the general audience to help ameliorate some of the hardships that transgender lives experience, right? We're going to discuss the unique issues that impact transgender lives and to have hopeful answers to hard questions. So that's the part that we're doing at One Pulse to, address discrimination among women, girls, LGBTQ, and society in general. And at the end of the day, right, our programs are strategized to counter discrimination that exists in all segments of society, particularly the LGBTQ community. So that is the closing of my presentation, and I will pivot back at this moment to the moderator. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Work as a lawyer at Human Rights Center Memorial, and for about 10 years I was also involved in LGBT activism, and I even became a co-founder of an LGBT organization. My presentation will be divided in 3 parts. First, I will provide a brief overview of the situation of LGBT people in Russia. Second, I will present one of the projects aimed at countering discrimination based on gender identity I was involved in. And third, as our roundtable is about campaigning and making everyone involved in countering discrimination of LGBTI people, I will suggest ways for getting involved in countering systemic discrimination against LGBTI people. Amelia has already briefly described the contexts in which I work. Russia is really a homophobic country. Amelia has said about the results of a global poll, and I will provide another results of a poll conducted by Levada Center, a Russian independent sociological agency, conducted in 2020, last year. This poll demonstrates that 18% of Russians believe that gays and lesbians need to be eliminated, and 32% of respondents say that they should be isolated from the society. So this is the level of opinion among the general public. And of course, the law banning so-called propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations among minors that was adopted on the federal level in 2013. No one knows, so the law doesn't, there is no description of propaganda on the law, so no one knows what propaganda is. But nevertheless, propaganda is punishable by a fine of up to $1,300, or if a legal entity commits, if propaganda is committed by a legal entity, this legal entity can be suspended for up to 90 days. In fact, this law makes impossible holding any public demonstration in support of LGBT rights. Of course, it keeps specialists that help LGBT youth, such as psychologists, in fear. And of course, it keeps in fear LGBT families with children. Moreover, cases concerning direct discrimination and even killings of LGBT people, there are cases. For example, I think that many of you have heard about an anti-gay purge in Chechnya that started in 2017, and in fact it continues until now. And we also know of a case in Moscow where the authorities tried to take away from two adopted children from a same-sex couple when they realized that the adopter was a gay person, so the family has to flee, and now they're living abroad. If a hate crime is committed against an LGBT person, the hate motive is never investigated or considered as an aggravated circumstances, despite our criminal code saying that it should be. Even if the perpetrator states that the motive of crime was hatred, the court doesn't take it into account. So this picture that Amelia and I have painted might look upsetting or even depressing. But there are some positive sides. For example, that in recent years, I was saying in last 10 years, LGBT activists became 10 years ago, LGBT activists were kind of marginalized activists. They were not, so the general civil society, general human rights organization did not see them, as allies of LGBT activists, didn't see themselves as allies of LGBT activists, and they didn't involve in like any petitions concerning LGBT people or something like that. The situation has changed to the better. Now LGBT activism is LGBT activists are a part of civil society. Many new organizations and initiatives have appeared in last 10 years, including regional initiatives, because Russia is a very large country, and of course regional activism is extremely important for us. One more thing, in general, the space for civil society in Russia has been narrowing over the past 10 years. So there are fewer and fewer opportunities to influence state policies. including policies towards LGBT people. But even in such circumstances, there is space for helping LGBT community, and I will speak about one of such ways. It's about legal help. So I'm not sure whether the questions should be asked when I finish, or they might be asked now. For example, if someone wants to learn more about general situation in Russia, or how should we organize this?
Tatiana, I think you should continue, and if people have questions, they could put them in the chat while you speak in, and I'll draw your attention to them.
Okay. Thank you. So this project, I would like to speak about Transgender Legal Defense Project. It was founded in 2012. I started to working with it in 2013. It was an association of lawyers from different cities in Russia. Its purpose was to help transgender people in their legal transition, because until 2018, the procedure of legal transitioning in Russia was not clear at all. This project pursued several goals. First, the first goal was to understand how legal transition is really, what is the reality of legal transition in Russia, because in 2012, 2015, there was, we realized, so we activists, we understood that people somehow changed their IDs, but we didn't understand how they do it, because the law was not clear. The second purpose was, of course, to help people to, as many people as we can, to legally transition. And the third purpose was to somehow make the authorities establish a clear, quick procedure of legal transition that would not require at least any surgical operations or hormone replacement therapy. So what was the legal situation in Russia until 2018? According to the law, the person who wanted to change their legal gender marker had to provide a certificate of an established form to the civil registry office. And that certificate should say that this person has their sex changed. It's a quote from the law. However, there was no form of such certificate. So any certificate provided would be a certificate that is not of a form that is not established in the law. So the reality was that people who wanted to change the legal gender marker had to go to the court and to prove that their sex has changed according to the law. The approaches of the courts were really different. Some of the judges believed that only surgery can lead to a legal gender recognition. Some of them thought that multiple surgeries should be performed, and someone thought that hormone replacement therapy was enough. But of course, everyone believed that something should be done, that a transgender person who wants to change the legal gender marker should make some medical interventions. So some medical interventions should be performed. And of course, all of them required this certificate from the psychiatrist stating that this person has a psychiatric diagnosis according to the ICD-10 that is still in force in Russia. From 2013 to 2018, I personally participated in more than 100 of such trials. We won most of them. Unfortunately, some of them were lost. At the same time, we started communicating with psychiatrists who deal with who produce that the person has homosexualism, and we realized what we realized was, in general, even the most conservative of them believed that the legal gender recognition should take place. So the basis of the legal gender recognition should be that certificate concerning transsexualism, though no medical intervention should be performed. At the same time, we realized that none of these medical specialists understands the position of the Ministry of Health on this issue. Because so our first goal, or our first vision, was that once we are in contact with the specialists, we start advocating before the Ministry of Health that the Ministry of Health develops the form of such medical certificate. But at some point, we realized that we didn't know whether this like developing of this form makes the life of transgender people better or worse. So we decided not to do this, and continue to help certain people in their certain situations. At the end of 2017, a draft form of this certificate was published by the Ministry of Health. Fortunately, it stipulated that a legal transition was possible without any medical interventions, but at the same time, it established a mandatory term of a psychiatric examination of 6 months before the person could get this certificate. We at this point of time, we of course started advocating before the Ministry of Health that this term should be eliminated, and fortunately, we reached our goal. And now, first of all, we have a clear and predictable and relatively quick procedure of legal gender recognition in Russia. It is gatekeeping, yes, because because the person needs the certificate of the Psychiatric Commission, but eliminating this point is not possible until Russia starts using ICD-11. So we are waiting for Russia to start using ICD-11, and so there is no term for issuing this document, and in some cases, our clients can receive such a document, for example, in a week after they first apply for it. What I personally learned from participating in this project is, first, that before you start involving in any problem, you can't even realize how many small issues are there, because in our opinion, the only problem was changing the birth certificate, this first stage, but actually transgender people face really many legal problems while changing other documents after this first stage, after changing their birth certificate. Second, that in some cases, when you see a very clear goal for your advocacy, so in our case, it was the form of certificate. In some cases, it might be better not to advocate, because your advocacy might lead to making the situation worse. And the third thing I learned was that even conservative, really conservative medical specialists can, in some certain cases, can become your allies at at least at very certain points. So what my third part of my presentation is what I can recommend to other participants. Unfortunately, I really didn't know who the participants are, but in my understanding that they're not legal professionals. So my first suggestion is that if there are LGBT persons that are in a difficult situation for some reason, the first thing you should do is to ask for legal advice, because we had many cases when a person came to us saying, I have a problem that no one can solve, because I have applied to many institutions, I have applied to the president of Russia, but my problem wasn't solved. But we realized that when a lawyer read his documents, when a lawyer got access to his documents, we understood that this problem can be solved without applying to the president, because the person should apply to the court, for example. Second, if there are no friendly lawyers, you should the thing you should do is to raise them. And legal community is much more responsive and much more friendly than I thought it would be, because when you bring some problem and you present it not as it's a problem of LGBTI person, it's a legal problem. Many legal specialists, even they are relatively homophobic, they don't mind involving in such cases. And the third thing that I learned is that if there are cases concerning LGBT people that are examined by international courts or tribunals such as European Court of Human Rights or Inter-American courts, there is a possibility for other organizations to send a request to intervene as a third party. And such interventions may be very useful for the applicant. For example, if the intervener can provide information on historical discrimination of transgender people, because the legal professionals who deal with the case are not necessarily professionals in the history of discrimination. That's what I would like to speak about. Thank you for your attention. Hopefully it was not too long.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you very much for sketching the context of your work and your activism, and also the lessons that you've learned. I mean, they're sometimes unexpected, the lessons that you've shared with us, but I think that for all of us who are in the space and involved in activism in different ways in our countries, these are very, very useful lessons for us to take into our own context. And also just to say what courage and strength you have had to take on more than 100 cases in the last few years. I'm sure you have been a huge source of inspiration and support to many people in a very dark time. So thank you very much. There is a question, but it's in Spanish, and I'm wondering if Gege can help me.
I can read for you, Emilia. If there are rights for transgender, transsexual, transvestites, the question comes from Carla, who's going to present now, but she's asking if there are rights for transgender, transsexual, transvestite people, and if they have access to labor laws.
In general, in Russia, there are no special rights for transgender people. So the only law that is special for trans people in Russia is the law on legal gender recognition. When it comes to every other procedures, transgender people have the same rights and the same obligations as any other person. Moreover, once the person gender is legally changed, the law starts to recognize this person as a person of a new gender. For example, if a person transitions from male to female, she got the rights for pension 5 years earlier than men. That's it. Or if a person transitions from female to male, he has an obligation to go to the army. That's it. That's how it works.
Buenos días a todos.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I am Marcia Echenique, and I am one of the survivors, just as we heard. I am a survivor of the dictatorship, and I wouldn't say that I'm one of the victims, though, because I believe that victims are our colleagues who are no longer with us to tell their stories. And that is what I will be starting off with. I will be reading, if I may, an article. This is an article that we have in the at the archive in Santa Fe, the Transvestite and Trans Archive. This article is from the La Capital newspaper in Rosario, and it's from 1980. So I will read. A 16-year-old minor who had been detained by the police in the morning time jumped from the second floor of the police station when he was being transferred. The homosexual, who was under Article 64B, which severely chastises those who dress and who appear to be of the opposite sex. Jumped from the second floor and down onto the central parts of the police station. At that very moment, when this article was written, I was being held in the same police station, and we felt the impact of our colleague. We heard it and we felt it. And I start with this not to victimize ourselves, but to simply show you some of the reality that we experienced back then. The dictatorship in Argentina ended in 1983. The police code stopped being followed in 2010, so not too long ago. I went into exile in 1987. The dictatorship had already been over, but the persecution continued, and increasingly so. 11 years ago, those police codes were removed in Argentina, but the persecution continued. We just heard about gender identity, and I'd like to explain that for us to be acknowledged as individuals, it's been 40 years. I am going on my 58th birthday now, but again, from my standpoint, I redefined the pain in my life. And one way of reivindicating the disappearance and the deaths of my friends was by remembering them and creating the Transvestite and Trans Archive in the province of Santa Fe. I think that this is a key tool. It's a key thing that we acknowledge the history and especially avoid future horrors as those that we experienced in penitentiaries in Argentina so that they never happen again. We have a moral obligation and an ethical obligation as well to, first of all, revindicate their deaths, because in Rosario, there were about 40 of us. When I came back from exile, there were only 13 trans women. The others had died from government abandonment. But again, to us, it isn't about victimizing ourselves. Creating the archive for us is actually a tool. It's a tool against discrimination, because if we don't know, I mean, I always say, memory isn't just about the past, but it's also about the present. If we want to understand the needs and the requirements of the trans and transvestite community, we must first learn of the past. And if we would like to look into the future, we must also know about the past and the present. That I am good up until this point, and I am open to any questions you might have. Thank you so much for having listened to me, and thank you for inviting us as well.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you so much. I don't see any questions in the chat. It's also not easy for me to see if anybody's raising their hand. So I think it's better for you to put your questions in the chat rather than raise your hands. I just really like the point you made, Marcia, about the importance of remembering the past and creating the archive in memory of those who didn't survive, and telling those stories, and that they are not, like, you are not a victim, but a survivor. And I think that's such an important point for our ongoing struggles and our ongoing activism, and that the archive does help to inform us as we continue our struggles and our strategies to build a more compassionate and better present and a more just future. So thank you very much, Marcia. I'd now like to ask Carla to give her presentation to us. There is a question, again, it's in Spanish, so it's
just a quotation. Sylvia put a quotation of one of Marcia's sentences, so it's not a question.
Okay. Can you read the sentence for us, Gege?
Yes. In the memory, in our memory, it's not only the past that is written, but also the present.
Thank you. Over to you, Carla.
Bueno, buenas a todas y todes.
Yes, hello everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you for this invitation and for allowing me to participate in this presentation. I see that you are all eminences who are working here in this matter of discrimination. And I've been asked to speak of the work that we've been doing with my colleagues, Marcia and Carolina, at the Transvestite and Trans Archive in Santa Fe. It's actually a whole team of people who have been working in different fields of the archive coming together. I might be somewhat repetitive with what Marcia has said, but it's only about but it's because of the importance of moving forward with a project as important as the archive is. And with that, I'd like to tell you about the transvestite and trans community that has lived, let's say, outside civil society without any true rights. And by not being counted, the importance of the work that we've been doing becomes even more important. And it's the work, and we tell of this work in the first person to talk about all of the exclusion and discrimination and persecution by state institutions at the social level and in fields such as in health, and it's persecution and detainment that we suffered from the police code that Marcia mentioned and its various articles. This police code was in effect in the Santa Fe province, where detainments for being transvestite, for being trans, and even for wearing an article of clothing from the opposite sex led to 14, 15, 30, up to 3 months of prison for the simple fact of having expressed yourself and going beyond the binary system of men and women. The detainments ended in 2010, so somewhat recently. And I mentioned this, and this is also why I asked the question I did to my colleague from Russia, because this was achieved in Argentina. These detainments ceased in Argentina, and the police code was removed in 2010, together with moving forward with marriage equality and the gender law in 2012, as we heard from Emilia, having to do with acknowledgement from the government that previously did not consider us to be subjects of rights. And this is all from a historical struggle that's been ongoing since 1986 by the trans collective. It wouldn't be possible, it would not have been possible if this struggle had not been collective in nature. In Rosario specifically, which is the city where we operate, we were able to denounce, back in the 90s, a police chief, and we were able to have him removed from his position through the Ministry of Justice by denouncing his persecution and abuse and harassment and mistreatment, together with all the violence that they would enact on all of us. And it wasn't just about the code on dressing of the opposite sex or being a transvestite or trans or transgender, but it was also the only foundation that existed for those actions. Many of the women, many of the transvestite and trans women in Argentina continue to have sex work as their only means of income. This population has been driven and has been obligated to this work by not having access to the labor market. When it comes to rights, as I said, we have been able to achieve these laws passing to establish basic rights for the community. Despite this, in many provinces in Argentina, these codes continue to be in place. These police codes continue to be in place. These moral codes are still in place based on gender identity and directed against the trans community. And this is what we are, so what we're trying to do with the archive is establish this tool that is cross-functional to all of the state organizations so that the government itself echoes our same words to somehow then establish this tool in the education system, that it even form part of the syllabus, and that in a way it can then become connected with other public policies. And I must say that here in Argentina, we have moved forward greatly at the Latin American level and at the world level when addressing these issues. Our gender law is cutting edge, as Emilia mentioned. It does address self-determination that kind of removed the pathology behind that we see in other articles, where by simply saying, my name is this, and this is my gender, and that is and that is enough grounds to be accepted under the gender law. The work at the archive is quite broad. It's slow moving, and it is a process that does require sometimes economical support that we don't always have, because this is all under our own initiative, and has been so since October of last year, where we are not only giving it our all financially, but giving it our all mentally and emotionally to move this project forward.
Nosotras pensamos, y en una de
What
las...
we have been thinking about in some of the work that we saw from the other presenters, we've been thinking about how to connect with the various ministries and other government agencies, and how to address how difficult it is to do things on your own. We do sometimes need support, and sometimes even the team members at the archive have to come in with their own tools and resources to continue to work on this very necessary initiative. So in a way, we believe and we are convinced of the fact that with the archive, in addition to the tool, it's also about doing a little bit of justice. Doing a little bit of justice in terms of what my colleague Marcia was saying, in that many of our friends were left along the way, and their stories were never told. And these stories, like it or not, are part of society. We have the right to be a part of society. So that is how I think we at the archive can contribute our grain of sand to change outlooks as far as everyone's lives in Argentinian society, so that we change that horrendous average lifespan for the trans population, which is from 35 to 45 years of age. Using the archives tool, we can enable the cultural change that we need, because in reality, I was just asking, in fact, I was asking Tatiana from Russia, what kind of labor rights did our trans friends in Russia have when it came to work? Today, in Argentina, there are labor laws for trans and transvestites in Argentina, and we've seen this as a positive discrimination because it does obligate certain job positions. And Argentinian society is not questioning it much. And this does take us back to the history that we've had and how we came to this job equality and job placement. With this job placement, the private sector can now assume the obligation. It's even a debt to society in opening up their spaces so that trans people can leave the sex work if they want to, and that prostitution be optional. But work access has to be ensured for trans people before that can happen. So at the archive, we've been thinking of creating a tool for public policy as well, so that all the other actions can be taken as a government in ensuring rights, so that historical debt can be repaid with the trans collective. Lastly, I would like to speak about justice and recognition, as Maya has also mentioned. Recognition in Argentina and from all levels of the judicial branch recognize the victims of transvesticide. When we say social transvesticide, that is actually the grounds with which and the reasons for which we do everything we do. by not having access to justice as we should, and by not having access to housing, to health, and to work. These are basic rights that anyone must have. And in this case, of course, the trans and transvestite community has always been denied this. So we are fighting to be, we're fighting so that transvesticide is acknowledged and recognized in Argentina, to add to the rights that have been denied to the trans community as a whole. I wouldn't like to go over time, but we are here for any questions you might have. And thank you all very much for allowing us to present and for allowing us to be part of this activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you very much. It's interesting to me to see how many connections there are with what Tatiana was talking about from a legal point of view, and how important the legal space is for challenging discrimination and making gains in terms of human rights in this space. I'm also very struck by the emphasis you placed on the role that the archive can play to bring about cultural change. And I think that, the two aspects that you highlighted, firstly in education and the importance of educating this generation around, all these issues that you've been campaigning for decades, and that often the younger generation is completely uninformed about, and also how it can contribute towards public policies and changing those. I was shocked to hear that the average age that transgender people live to is between 35 and 45 years. I didn't know that. And also the idea that the workspace needs to be protected for transgender people. In South Africa, we have policies that, deal with addressing the questions of race after, the end of apartheid. And we refer to those policies as affirmative action. And I think that that's really what you are talking about too, the need for affirmative action with regard to work opportunities for transgender people, in order to give them options and not force them into sex work to make a living. So thank you very much for your presentation, Carla. And I'd now like to, there's a question. Abdullah has a question. What are the biggest problems facing deportation in integration with society? Does that?
Maybe Abdullah can make the question in Arabic, and Ahmed can translate for us, please. Ahmed, did you manage to translate that?
So my question was about the biggest problems that LGBTI society or community faces in their society. I'll ask him to add more clarification.
أنا كنت يا أحمد تسمعني؟ كنت حابة أطرحها في موضوع.
So my question is about, or my inquiry is about, the most prominent problems that the LGBTI community faces from the local communities themselves.
هل افتهم لك السؤال؟
Do you get the question, or do you need more clarification? He's asking.
Oh, that's good. We understood it. And this has to do somewhat with what I was just mentioning, where when it comes to rights, in 2010, we had marriage equality and the gender identity law in 2012. And then 2015, we had the civil code changed so that we could now have access to rights such as reproductive rights and the right to adoption, even with same-sex marriages, together with labor opportunities. But in reality, the biggest problem has been cultural change that we understand takes time. It has to evolve. But it's also true that we, in the LGBTIQ plus community, we must make ourselves visible in these issues to collectively, always collectively and jointly undertake this work to address discrimination and to reject the exploitation that is still there. And if we're talking about the one major issue, well, society still continues to be trans-hateful. They're still homophobic, homo-transphobic. And I say this because even yesterday, in the city of Buenos Aires, in the capital, there was violence against a very well-known singer called Leo Garcia, where he proclaimed that he was homosexual, and he was attacked. And today, since we have rights, we can denounce these acts. But this isn't just about the laws, because, of course, laws are important for us. And they do address the collective issues, and there is progress, but it isn't just that. All of us, collectively, the LGBTQI plus collective, need to put into practice and have the government assume responsibility. The government has to assume responsibility to enact more public policies so that this cultural change that we need can be put on the table and be accepted, to show that we need that equality, we need more equity, and we need to somehow end discrimination. I think we are moving forward in that regard again, but there's still a lot more to go. Discrimination is still present in early childhood, in schools. It is still present in the job market. It is still present even in institutions such as the police when you go and file a complaint. So there, I think there is still a very significant reality that has to be addressed by the struggle, the LGBTIQ struggle, together with trans and transvestite identities that are beyond that male-female binary, so that the rest of society, and I say the rest of society because it is also all of society's struggle. It's everyone's struggle. Hence the importance of this meeting, so that we can create networks and convey experiences from all over the world, just like we're doing today.
Thank you very much, Carla. Now I'm going to call on Carolina to give us her input and to round off the conversation about the Archivo de la Memoria Travesti Trans.
Emilia, I'm sorry, I think Marcia wanted to add a few words.
Oh, okay. Marcia?
Sí, perdón.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing because based on the response, I did want to emphasize that at one point I did say that for my gender identity, when I read that article from El Diario, I was 18. And to have our identities acknowledged, 40 years had to go by. So although today there are certain laws that are supporting the trans and transvestite collective here in Argentina, we cannot wait for 40 years to go by to to start that cultural change machinery in society. And that's why we need to take measures apart from just the government measures so that children such as us and our colleagues and my colleague who was 16 years old and jumped from a second-story building because of that lack of support, that's why it's just so necessary to have these memory initiatives, to see how much time actually had to go by for there to be a cultural change. And so that society realized this, that what they were doing with us was horror. It was an extermination of a certain peoples that was happening with us. So that's why I just wanted to emphasize that one point. We cannot wait for so long. The Trans and Transvestite Archive provides the memory to society and to the government and to the Trans and Transvestite Collective, so that with the reports that we compile and based on the pictures and the documents, we see how in Rosario and in Santa Fe, a League of Decency came up, which was an organization between police and military and Argentinian society and Rosario society, the upper class actually. Members of the church, they all were parts of this organization, and they were the ones who would order the detainments, and they were the ones who would determine what was moral and what was immoral. And we were there caught in the middle, just children, teens, people. That's why this archive, this Trans and Transvestite Archive, is so necessary, so that it can be used, just like my colleague Carla said, in every field, mainly in the educational field. That's all I wanted to emphasize. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. Over to you now, Carolina.
Hola, buenos días a todos. Gracias por la invitación.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My voice is a little rough. Apologies. I would like to tell you that on May 17th, 2018, I made history by being the first trans Latin American woman to have received historical reparation. That reparation took place because the state of Santa Fe in Argentina accepted that women were victims of persecution and our freedom was taken away from us because of our gender. During those years, there were repression and persecution because of sexual diversity. This led to a punitive power deployment by the state to socially control those who had a different identity, an identity different from man and woman, and the trans community was a victim of that. During those years, we didn't have any rights. All rights were denied to us: the right to study, to work, basic human rights. We couldn't even go to a hospital, because if we went to a hospital, we would be detained. Everything was denied. And those of us who made it were the ones that had the luck to migrate, because those who couldn't are not here anymore to tell this story. We didn't have the right to even go buy bread, because if we went to a bakery to buy bread, we wouldn't go back home. We would be detained in a pharmacy, on the street. Anywhere, we would be arrested up to 120 days. These were horror years for trans people in Argentina. Luckily, thanks to democracy, I was given reparation in the same place where 40 years ago we suffered detentions. That day, on May 17, 2018, was a historical date for us in Argentina and Latin America, because what took place has to continue taking place, because many of our peers need reparation because many of them cannot work. They are sick. Many bad things happen to them. So that is necessary. Well, that's what I wanted to say. And thank you for giving us the floor. I think that is very important to all of us. Our fight continues, our struggle continues. We have to continue on because I think that no human being should be able to humiliate us, to exploit us, just because we are different. Have a good day.
Thank you, Carolina. Very powerful note to end on. No human being should be discriminated against, should be exploited just because we are different. Carolina, may I ask what form reparations took for you? Was it monetary? Was it...
Sí, a nosotros nos beneficiaron con
Yes, we were given a pension that we are paid every month. And the state asked for forgiveness in the same place where 40 years ago they would detain us, humiliate us, rape us. So democracy can be redeemed.
Can I also ask Carolina, Marcia, Carla, they had shared a video with us of the space that they are mentioning, which is a place that they're also memorializing. And we have the short video. Can we play it and then carry on to the questions? Cami, are you okay?
Please.
Este era un lugar de detención. En este mismo lugar quedaron los recuerdos de aquellas.
This was a detention center, and we hold the memory of those who are not here anymore. We were detained because of our gender condition as a social control strategy for any person who didn't fit in between the man-woman description. The trans community was persecuted, but this took place before the dictatorship and after the dictatorship. It is important that there is a memory of this so that the errors or horrors committed against us will not repeat with a memory that is latent and which is part of the collective, that new generations need to know what was done against us, against our generation, and that somehow this is a fundamental and transformational tool for the militants. I am convinced that our struggle was not in vain. Today, November 20th, is the day of trans memory. We are here to reivindicate our cross-dressing partners, Deborah Garcia, Adriana, Margarita, Libarda, Miriam Corso, Patricia, Marisa Paola, Pamela Tavares, Paola, Alejandra González, Valeria, Lorena, Carla, La Paquita, Moni Cardoso, Jorge Liana,